Hi, I'm Bill Doherty, and I want to welcome the viewers to another edition of Bill's Bullpen. Bill's Bullpen is a program that's intended to give folks an idea of what's going on both locally and regionally here on Cape Cod. Today I have with me Steve
Sayers.
Steve Sayers and I share that wonderful privilege of having graduated from Boston College, and something that we're both very proud of, aren't we?
And we are very proud of it,
Okay,
absolutely.
So all of that Jesuit training has sort of coalesced, and he's produced a book. Show the book.
It is 100 Things to Do in Plymouth, Massachusetts Before You Die.
Okay, now, I got to ask the question, what made you think about doing this kind of a book?
It's a little bit of a departure because I write supernatural thrillers and horror novels that are based in Cape Cod, Plymouth, and the islands.
Loving Lovecraft, huh?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually a Stephen King devotee.
Okay.
Early Stephen King, grew up on him. So I always tried to write like that. But I had the opportunity to work with a press called Reedy Press, and they do this list of 100 things to do, you know, San Francisco, New York City, and they wanted to do a Plymouth book. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to just pay homage to the place that I've loved my entire life. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, it's kind of like a best of list, but I like to think of it more as things that are uniquely Plymouth, things that you can only find in Plymouth that make it a one-of-a-kind town.
Okay, well, both of us actually share an experience of Whitehorse Beach. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I was told that by my father that I would know when I was growing up because I realized how cold that water was.
Yeah, it's incredibly cold. And I started at the Cape. I grew up in my summers in Falmouth, and the water's nice and bath water. It's really nice. And then I came up here, and when I was in college, I used to come down and visit some friends at Whitehorse Beach, jump in that water, and it was an education. Yeah.
And yes, it certainly was. And in my Whitehorse experience, by the time I got to, because I was there from the time I was a kid. At the end of World War II, mm-hmm. My mother bought a piece of property for, I think it was like $300, the land. Yeah. And my father wrote back, because he was still on active duty over in Japan, mm-hmm. and he wrote back and he said, "What are you spending me money on something so stupid as that?" And then she wrote back, she said, "And I expect you to put a cottage on there." So his idea of a cottage was he and his pal went down to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and they bought 2 Quonset huts, and he took it apart by hand, put it on a flatbed truck, and then dumped it on the property. Wow. And immediately, and as you may know, at one time Whitehorse Beach was a shanty town.
That's right, shanty town.
And the neighbors were all up in arms about this tin shack that was, that might be put up on this pristine beach property. And the building inspector said, "That's the only fireproof building here." So anyway, we summered there until until my kids were until my wife and my kids were there, because I used to split with my sister. Mm-hmm. And at one time it was rainy, it was cold, my kids had diarrhea, there was no hot water, and I got a ration of crap like you wouldn't believe when I came down for the weekend, let's say to settle in. And that's when we packed everything up. And the next weekend, as I was coming home from work, I stopped at Leechmere Sales, bought a tent, and said to the kids, "Who wants to go camping?" Which was kind of unusual, because when I was in the service, I spent a lot of time out in the field, and I swore I would never be under canvas again as long as I lived. And we went, the kids are all jumping up and down, and I'm packing up the car, to set out, and my wife says, "Are you going to leave me behind?" And I said, "Well, if you come because you're doing it voluntarily, okay? You're not being forced into it, and I don't want to hear any stuff from you about, why are we doing this, okay?" So we went, and it turned out to be Vermont. We're in Vincennes, which is the southern end of Lake Champlain. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely gorgeous. The classic Vermont moon that they write about. Yeah. And on the way going home, she says, "Buy another tent." So anyway, my
daughter went to
UVM.
Sort of
capsulized the Whitehorse Beach experience. But let's get into how did you select some of the restaurants that I've never heard of? Of course, I've been out of Plymouth for a long time.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I'm not a foodie so much. Like I know there's people who just live for restaurants, and that's not really the.
Some of us do that.
So well, some of us do, but yeah, I mean, I gathered a lot of information from people. So I have friends here, and we had sessions where we just talked about the places we like to go. I actually got onto some Facebook groups and all things Plymouth and other things, and just put these questions out there, like, what do you like to eat? What do you like when you go to these places? And got some, kind of compiled a list, and then I started to go to these places, take a look at the menus and read, you know, some reviews and things that have been written about these restaurants, and just kind of compiled that list. And of course, I figure if I went to every one of them, I'd probably weigh, you know, 50 pounds more than I do. So
depends upon your metabolism.
well, that's true. That's true. So that was kind of fun. I mean, a lot of the places I'd been, because I've been a seasonal resident here for 21 years, so I'd been to many of the restaurants. But I always say this, the longer you stay in a place, the less you do, because you start to become accustomed to your routine. So there were a lot of restaurants I just didn't know about. I didn't know about new things. So I had to try a lot, and it was a lot of fun. So
well, since you went to BC, I'm sure that say visiting the craft beer places was not a
problem. Not a problem at all. No, there's a lot of good ones.
Yeah, and that when we lived in Germany, that was one of the things that I really enjoyed, because I was I used to write contingency plans for exercises, and one of the things you did was you went around to the different villages to find out what was going on, and I always visited the craft beer places.
Of course, it tells you a lot about the community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And Plymouth, those craft beer places have really exploded. So it's been a real. There are a lot of ones I didn't know, but there's a lot of them I know now. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that tickled me, let's see, the last time I was in Plymouth, was that I went to a tea shop, which and it was run by an English couple that were, I guess, they're not expats, they're immigrants.
Yeah. And
they'd set up this business of the different types of tea and scones and things like that. It was kind of unusual. Yeah. But the restaurants, getting back to the restaurants, when you say the longer you're here, the less you do, it's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because I got stuck on a couple of restaurants when I was growing up, and some of Isaac's, for example, is gone.
Right.
Okay, and then McGrath's has now changed its name to East End Grill, I think, and you sort of get in that rut of going back to the places that you know.
Yeah, I had kids, and we just kept going to Lobster Hut and Woods Seafood, or Cabbie Shack. These were the things they wanted to do.
So I find that this kind of a guidebook that identifies, I think it's about 26 restaurants, 26?
I think it's closer to 30, but around there, yeah.
Around there, that give you an opportunity to sort of widen your horizons. And I think that in and by itself has a lot of value.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, people love coming to towns for the restaurants and the food, and I think you have to be really, you have to give people that, be intentional in what you choose, because that's where people are going to go, and they're going to walk away from Plymouth with a feel for the place based on the restaurants.
Now, talk a little bit about, of course, I've been to Plymouth Plantation, and I remember going to the Mayflower 2, and at the time because I was actually there when the Mayflower 2 came, so I'm a lot older than you are.
It was 1957, I think it was,
yeah, right.
when it sailed into.
I was still in college then.
Yeah, that's 30 years.
Time does have a way of creeping up on us. And I remember, going in there and having to duck every place.
Yeah, it's so small.
Yeah.
And I mean, you walk on Layden Street and you see some of those houses that people lived in. They're so small. I mean, I didn't know people were that small back then. But the same is true for the Mayflower. And I don't know how they packed 130 people onto that to get across the ocean. That must have been quite a ride.
Yeah. Now, the Plymouth Rock. My favorite story of Plymouth Rock was the job of choice that every kid growing up in Plymouth was trying to figure out, where do you make the connection in order to get the job of the Pilgrim, okay? Because here's what he used to do. You'd come in, you'd have the portico, right? And you have only one entrance and exit. And he would march everybody around the rock, and he would stand at the entrance, okay? And he would give the spiel. about, you know, the Harvard, you know, the rock breaking in half, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah, you know, and all the rest of it, and everybody, oh, there's a rock, okay, it says 1620 on it. Well, I'm not really sorry, you know. So in any case, he'd finish his spiel and he'd say, now, we don't get paid for this, we're all volunteers, and if you like the presentation, and he'd take off this hat that was like a wastebasket and put it out there, and you'd put money in it, okay? Because you couldn't get out past him without him looking you in the eye and say, you cheap, to do that. So anyway, all of us kids lusted for that job.
Oh yeah.
But we never were was it high enough up in the food chain to really qualify for it.
Yeah.
Now, but you mentioned another rock in there.
Yeah, there's a couple other rocks. I think Plymouth, everyone thinks about Plymouth Rock as the place, but there's two other really important rocks with historical significance. One is Pulpit Rock, which is out on Clark Island, the place where the Pilgrims actually, when they were getting in their little boat to come to Plymouth, were blown off course by a storm. They stayed there and they set a mass before they came across the water, which was very indicative of who they were as people. They traveled across the ocean to get to Plymouth, but they waited, and it was Sunday, and they said a mass, and they waited till the next day to go, which I think is very interesting. The other is Sacrifice Rock, which has some significance in Wampanoag history. So travelers that were traveling through Plymouth would, you know, leave sticks or stones or little leaves on top of this rock as a token of appreciation or a token of sacrifice. And it probably is the oldest historical site in Plymouth because it was used, you know, 1,000 years before the Pilgrims ever got there.
Well, the Wampanoags have been here for 13,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and one of the things you can find out, if you know, in revisionist history, you recognize that the first set of Pilgrims were very, I'd say, involved with the local tribes. The Wampanoags politically were smart enough to negotiate with the Pilgrims to get the firepower that the Pilgrims brought with them. And it was only the second wave of Pilgrims that reverted back to what I would call, as those of us of even part Irish, you know, that they reverted back to what Englishmen sometimes do about a superiority complex.
That's right.
And as a result, it was there. Now, I'm trying to remember if there was anything about Thanksgiving. Yeah, there was some things about Thanksgiving and the walk that they did down, you know, down the hill. But is there any mention, or did you find out when in your, let's say, in your research about the real reason why the Indians, Native Americans showed up at the, you know, at the feast?
Oh, I'm sure I did.
Well, anyway, as I recall, it was they heard them firing off their guns, and they thought they were getting ready to get attacked. So they showed up to find out what was going on, and when they were there, then they started eating the clams and and so forth. Of course, one of the interesting things at Plymouth now was it Plymouth Patuxet, which used to be just Plymouth Plantation, was that let's see, the folks were still, you know, the volunteers and the people that were, you know, doing this stuff were talking from the point of view of what they knew at the, you know, at the period. Okay, and they also talked about how a lobster was a pain, was sort of a thing you fed to prisoners, and they got tired of it because they were so, you know, they ate so much of it.
Now everyone has to have one. Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
It costs a lot of money.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Memorial Hall, and did you do anything on the Mayflower Compact?
Not in the book. I didn't want to get too deep into history. I mean, I think there's some nice historical tidbits in here, and I think there's some information that every Plymouth resident should know. But boy, at some point you gotta, you know.
Okay, well, of course, some of us who did a close reading on it and were introduced to dialectic materialism when we had a philosophy and theology courses at the Heights.
Yeah, majored in philosophy.
You know, that was socialism, you know, 101.
Yeah.
And one of the issues, you know, that we find out that why it doesn't work is that you can't depend upon the commitment of all of the people that are involved in it, so it becomes more of a tactic rather than a philosophy at some point.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so now, if you were to pick out, as you go through the book, what are the kinds of things that you think are important for people who come to Plymouth that they should actually find out more about?
Yeah, I think Plymouth is tricky because there's the historical thing, and I think that's kind of like the heart of Plymouth. People come to Plymouth to go to the Mayflower, Burial Hill, all those kind of things. But I think if you want to know about Plymouth, you want to know about the soul of Plymouth, and I think that is the thriving art community. We've got galleries, there are the Americana Theater, there's shows, there's music, there's a lot of things that go on. And if I could direct somebody to Plymouth to see what it's really like, I would tell them to come down to First Fridays, which is the first Friday of every month. The galleries open, the pubs, the taverns, they stay open with live music, and the coffee houses, and there's activities for kids, there's live art demonstrations, and you really get a sense of who the people are in Columbia. And I think that's important. The history is one thing, and that's really important, and there's so many great things. But to really see the people and see what's happening in town, First Fridays is my call.
Well, that's a great thing to know, and I think that folks would be encouraged to do that, because it gives them a destination and some anticipation of what was going on.
Yeah, and it's 5 to 8 in the evening, and 6 months out of the year, from May to October, and it's just an active, really exciting kind of thing going on. They open up all the old houses to walk through those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can see some of the history, but also experience some of the creatives in town, which I think is important.
Yeah. Well, I know that I've been to the Spire, for both music and also for plays, and that was run by that other group that that's mentioned. Was it
the Mass Bay
something like
cultural?
But in any case, there's it's a wonderful venue. The only problem is finding a parking place. Now, this is another thing I wanted to mention to you. So, one of the things that many of these books, this is a criticism.
Okay, no, I'm ready for it.
One of the things that many of these books don't mention is the difficulty of finding someplace to park if you're driving.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the people who come, so I would think it would be a useful thing to know as to where the public parking was available, so folks would not be be ticketed, as they come to see these things.
Yeah, actually, across from the Spire, there is some parking. There's some free parking around.
Yeah, it's up the hill and
up the hill
and to the back.
And then there's paid parking on the other side of the street. And then, of course, there's a lot, maybe 2 miles down the road, where you can just leave your car, but no one wants to do that. So, yeah, there's some parking in proximity to the downtown, the Spire, and the Plymouth Center for the Arts, and but yeah, that's a problem in any city and any growing city, and certainly Plymouth is growing right now in a lot of good ways, and a lot of ways that people aren't so happy with, but. Yeah, parking's always going to be a problem.
Well, I have noticed that if you're going to North Plymouth, I remember serving mass at is it St. Peter's? There's two churches. There's one
in North Plymouth.
There's one in downtown Plymouth that closed, and then there's one out in North St. Mary's, I think it is.
Okay.
Okay, that's out there, and they do have a parking lot, and I'm surprised that more people don't use it. But then that's closer to Cordage, and
right.
And on the Cordage part. What would you do mention the Cordage Park in there? Talk a little bit about because it does have parking. Talk a little bit about some of the things that go on that that are worthwhile to look at Cordage Park.
Yeah, there's a couple of course, there's the Cordage Museum, which is what they call the kind of the forgotten museum. But the Cordage Company was the biggest rope and twine manufacturer in the world at one point, and for 100 years it was the #1 place that supported.
And that was hemp that you made rope with.
Yeah.
Not gummies.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a very the Cordage Company was very progressive in that its founder, Bourne Spooner, felt that people who were employees that were happy, healthy, and taken care of were more productive.
Amen.
And I know, and here we are 200 years later, and we're going backwards. But he provided education, health care, housing, libraries, sports teams, newspapers for the people who worked for his company. And they were very successful. And now, you know, there's a museum there that kind of honors that, and it's really interesting to go in there and take a look at what went on there. Because people always think about just pilgrims, but there's more to Plymouth than that. And now there's things like Dirty Water Distillery out there, and there's some places that are kind of cool. It's kind of a growing place to go.
Well, I think all places look for what I call how do you not rehabilitate but sort of get past generativity with regard to the area in order to to keep it viable. I know that up on the North Shore they spend a lot of time on looking at mill buildings
and refurbishing those. Yeah.
Now, talk a little bit about the art venues that that are in the book.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, the Plymouth Center for the Arts is one of the best. It's a gallery, but it also has classes. It has, you want to do origami, you want to do clay, on the spinning wheels. They have all sorts of classes for people, for kids. They have like little camps for kids, and people don't really remember too much, or they don't take that into consideration. There's a lot to do for kids there in terms of art. And there's all sorts of little galleries like the Art Shop, Jessert Studio. There's a couple of Eddie Murray and Jenny Friss who work there are just artists that work right in front of you. They make beautiful things. And then there's all sorts of little shops that are selling art from people in the area. It's such a great asset that this town has, and I think people overlook that.
Now, we hadn't talked about some of the other theater venues, in the area. I have a fond memory of the Priscilla Beach Theater, because that's where all of us kids used to go, because in those days theater was not very popular.
Right.
So I used to get these discounted passes, and we would go see things.
Yeah.
And I do have that experience of to recall when a silent film star named Gloria Swanson was there, and I'd never heard of her. Then a couple of years later, and this is how young I was, she was in a movie called Sunset Boulevard. Okay, so that sort of brought that to let's say everybody's front hand in mind. But what I found out as when I became a senior adult was that she was visiting Joe Kennedy Sr. At that time, and that was her cover story to come and appear at the Priscilla Beach Theater. Now, Priscilla Beach Theater, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's the oldest barn theater in the country. I think for 86 years it's been, delivering great summer stock kind of theater, which, actors will go down there and spend the summer and work on their craft and present some shows. There's been a number of famous Hollywood legends that have come out of it, like Paul Newman.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rob Reiner, who of course is a great director.
Yeah.
Some other people, a guy from Gunsmoke, I can't remember his name. He was there. A lot of people spent their summers there. No, I don't.
That was his.
Oh,
character.
that was his character in the.
And his brother was an anchor on, I think, both Channel 4 and Channel 7. I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, that's a wonderful place, and it actually went through a very significant renovation.
Oh, it had to.
Yes, it did, and a couple of philanthropists in town put in a lot of money and made it just beautiful. And they said, we're not going to make any money on this, but we're going to have a wonderful, continuation of this asset to the town.
Okay. One of the things that I recall growing up at White Horse Beach was there was a bar called Keller's. It used to have dancing under the stars when it didn't rain.
Yeah.
I was wondering, did you find any venues like that as far as people could go for that kind of entertainment?
For dancing?
Yeah, for dancing. Let's say for night out, for dinner and dancing. Because when I read through that, I didn't see any mention of that. Very, very big on food.
Yeah.
But not on let's say the self-entertainment.
Yeah, I think the self-entertainment has kind of moved into the brewery kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, there's places now where you can bring your dogs, and you can. I mean, it's a different kind of thing. I don't think. I mean, there is dancing. I mean, you can go to Cabbie Shack at night, and there's music, and you can dance. But yeah, I think the dance thing is not. I didn't find as much in Plymouth, you know,
Okay.
for
All right,
that
well,
for that
you know,
thing.
it's a fair point.
Yeah.
All right, now, in looking at the whole book, okay, it's what I'd call low on, let's say, philosophical insights and high on, you know, visual, and also with the theater, you know, let's say that type of participant kind of
Yeah.
activity. If you were to set up a, based upon what you have in the book, if you were to set up a walk, where would you start and where would you end?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, that would be difficult because I think it's not just the waterfront that is Plymouth. I think it's Manamet. I think it's Chiltonville. I think it's North Plymouth. I think there's a lot of that. But if I had to do a walk down the waterfront, I mean, I would do, or that area, I would probably start at Burial Hill. For me, that's one of the most peaceful places in town. You can look out over the ocean. It's got history. You know, I'd walk down Leyden Street to see the history. I would curl around Coles Hill, which is an amazing place, and was actually the first burial site in Plymouth, which they only discovered after rain washed all the bones into the harbor back in 1735, which a lot of people don't know. And I would curl past the rock. I'd go very quickly past the rock because there's not much to see there. And then I'd go down the main street, and I'd stop in just about every little place that I could and grab a bite to eat, grab a glass of wine, and I'd probably keep going to North Plymouth. I would go to Nelson Park and get on my bicycle, and I would travel up about a mile, and there I'd be at
Uphill
Portage.
all the way.
Yeah.
You're a better man than I am.
Well, I do like the outdoor recreation opportunities in Plymouth. There are a lot of them, whether it's, you know, Miles Standish State Forest or you know, Tidmarsh Wildlife Sanctuary, or a lot of the preservation lands the Wildlands Trust has preserved. There's so much open space here, green space, and that's really supposedly
I recall
healthy
that
for you.
there's one area that had to stay perpetually open, so you could have a view of the sea as you go into North Plymouth. And you know, there's stuff down at the bottom, you know, closer to the water. Okay, but it's basically it's it has to stay perpetually open. So you would go by there on your bicycle if you're going to North Plymouth. Yeah. Okay. And I'm trying to remember what the name of it is, but it does have a name, and it's just grass, and, and you have a view of the the water you know, from there. Okay. So anyway, believe it or not, we've come to the end.
Oh, so quickly.
And so now I'm looking at you and saying, what is the main takeaway you want to have for people? Oh, and by the way, where do you buy the book?
Okay, well, it is available downtown at Uva Wine Bar, Three Daughters Jewelry and Gifts. It's at Local Mystique, which is a really cool little shop. Book Love, which is in Pine Hills, a new bookstore. It's in Barnes & Noble in Dartmouth, Barnes & Noble in Hyannis.
Okay, Barnes & Noble would be something everybody knows.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And
so now that they have an idea of where to buy it, what is the main thing you want people to take away from the book?
I think that Plymouth isn't what you think it is.
I think that's a great place to end.
Yeah.
Okay, and with that, I want to thank Steve Sayers for coming, and I want to thank the viewers for taking the time to find out a little bit more about what goes on across the bridge into the next county. You know, Plymouth County. You've heard of that, okay? But in any case, thank you very much for watching. This has been a production of Born TV.